Get away from that car. You don't belong here. Somebody call security. Now." The words cut through the morning air like a slap. Diane Hargrove stood at the edge of the Whitmore Estates parking lot, one hand raised, one finger pointed, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once been told she was wrong. She was dressed for the occasion: linen blazer, pearl earrings, shoes that cost more than a month's rent. And she aimed that certainty at the man crouching near the burning car like a weapon she had used many times before. His name was Marcus Webb. He was wearing a brown uniform. He had a delivery scanner clipped to his belt and a smear of ash across his left forearm, and he did not move when she spoke. The crowd had gathered fast. A dozen residents of Whitmore Estates stood in a loose semicircle, coffee cup still in hand, watching. Not one of them spoke. Not one stepped forward. They stood the way people stand when they have decided that what is happening is someone else's problem, and they watched Diane Hargrove point her finger at the man in the brown uniform while the smoke thickened and the baby inside the car made no sound at all. "I said, get away from that vehicle. Do you hear me? Security is coming. You do not touch that car." He still did not move. "Stay with this one to the end. Every detail here is here for a reason." What Diane Hargrove did not know, standing there in her linen blazer with her finger raised and her voice climbing, was who she had just ordered away from that burning car. She did not know what he had already done. She did not know what he had spent 22 years building, quietly, without announcement, without a single word to anyone who might have changed the way they looked at him. And when the truth came out, when it finally surfaced the way truth always does, slow and inevitable and impossible to argue with, it cost her more than she had ever imagined losing. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you who Marcus Webb really was, and why that morning was never going to end the way Diane Hargrove expected. Now, here is what most people did not know about Marcus Webb. He was 41 years old. He had been driving a delivery route through the Whitmore Estates corridor for 6 years, and before that, he had driven a different route through a different part of the city for 4 years, and before that, he had spent 12 years doing something else entirely. Something that the brown uniform and the scanner and the battered work boots gave no indication of whatsoever. He was a man who had learned, early and at considerable cost, that the world makes assumptions about what it sees, and that the most powerful thing a person can do is let it. His grandmother, Cora Webb, had taught him that. She had raised him in a narrow row house on Clement Street in Baltimore, 3 blocks from the harbor, in a neighborhood that smelled of salt water and bus exhaust and the particular kind of ambition that comes from having very little and deciding it is not going to stay that way. Cora Webb was a woman of few words and enormous precision. She kept her house immaculate. She kept her accounts in a ledger by hand. She grew collard greens in 5 clay pots on a concrete stoop and tended them with the same attention she gave to everything she valued. And when Marcus was 11 years old, sitting at her kitchen table after a day at school during which another boy had laughed at his second-hand shoes, she set a glass of water in front of him and said something he would carry for the rest of his life. "Stay low," she said. "Build high. Let them underestimate you. That's not a weakness. That's a strategy." He did not fully understand it then. He understood it completely now. Marcus had been a paramedic, not a volunteer, not a trainee, a licensed, certified, field-experienced emergency medical technician who had worked for the Baltimore City Fire Department for 12 years before a back injury in 2019 forced him off active duty. He had responded to over 4,000 calls. He had delivered 2 babies in the field. He had performed CPR in a grocery store parking lot, in a school gymnasium, in the cab of an overturned tractor trailer on the Beltway. He had been first on scene at a house fire in Cherry Hill in 2014 and pulled a 3-year-old girl from a second-floor window while the staircase below him was already burning. He had never told anyone at the delivery company any of this. He had filled out his employment forms honestly. He had listed his certifications where they asked for certifications. But no one had asked, and he had not volunteered. And in 6 years of early mornings and heavy packages and polite nods at the gates of communities like Whitmore Estates, not a single person had thought to look past the uniform. He moved in silence. He built in silence. He kept his EMT recertification current every 2 years because Cora Webb had also taught him that a skill maintained is a life preserved, and because he could not bring himself to let it lapse, even when the back would not let him carry a stretcher anymore. He drove his route. He made his deliveries. He watched the world the way a man watches it when he has learned that watching is its own form of readiness. And on a Tuesday morning in September, on the access road that curved through the bayou of Whitmore Estates toward the residence parking structure, that readiness was the only thing that mattered. Now, let me tell you about the place where everything went wrong, and about the woman who ran it. Whitmore Estates was not a neighborhood in any ordinary sense. It was a gated residential community in the outer ring of the county, 47 single-family homes and 12 luxury townhouses arranged around a central amenity corridor that included a clubhouse, a pool, a tennis pavilion, and a parking structure with reserved spaces for residents and their guests. The median home value inside of the gates was $1.2 million. The annual HOA fee was $8,400. The community had its own security detail, its own landscaping crew, its own aesthetic standards committee, and its own board of directors, which Diane Hargrove had chaired for the past 5 years. Diane Hargrove was 53 years old. She had married into Whitmore Estates and stayed after the divorce, which told you something about her priorities. She drove a white Range Rover. She wore her hair in a severe blonde cut, maintained at a salon 40 minutes away because she had explained to more than one neighbor the local options were not adequate. She had a gift for administration and a talent for authority, and she had built the board of Whitmore Estates into something that functioned less like a homeowners association and more like a private jurisdiction. One where her word carried the weight of policy and her displeasure carried consequences. She knew every resident by name, every vehicle by plate number, and every vendor by contract status. She had personally overseen the renegotiation of the landscaping contract in 2021, the installation of the new gate system in 2022, and the termination of the previous delivery protocol that had allowed service vehicles into the interior roads. Under the current protocol, delivery personnel were required to drop packages at the exterior staging area and were not permitted beyond the first gate without a resident escort. She had written that protocol herself. She believed in order. She believed in standards. And she believed, with a certainty she had never examined and never needed to, that she could identify at a glance who belonged in a place like Whitmore Estates and who did not. Marcus Webb, in his brown uniform with his scanner and his work boots and the smear of ash on his forearm, did not belong. She had decided that before she finished crossing the parking lot. What she did not know was that the ash was already there when she saw him. What she did not know was what had put it there. The call had come in at 7:14 in the morning, though no one had called it in yet. Marcus had been on the access road. 2 stops from the end of his morning route when he smelled it. Not smoke first, but something underneath the smoke, a chemical sharpness that his body recognized before his mind named it. Burning insulation, electrical fire. He had smelled it in enough vehicle fires to know it was not a trash bin or a cigarette. He had pulled his truck to the shoulder and walked toward it. The car was a silver sedan parked in a visitor space near the exterior lot, burning from the undercarriage up, the kind of fire that moves fast and quiet before it announces itself with flames. The driver's door was open. The driver was gone. The back door was closed. Marcus had seen the car seat through the window before he reached the car. He had not hesitated. He had not looked around for someone else to handle it. He had not pulled out his phone to call 911 first, because 12 years of field experience had taught him the order of operations when a fire is moving and a child is not moving, and that order does not begin with a phone call. He had used his elbow on the window, reached through the broken glass, unlatched the door, and had the child, a girl, he would later estimate, somewhere between 8 and 12 months old, still strapped into the car seat, out and on the grass 12 feet from the vehicle in under 40 seconds. The baby was breathing. She was crying, which was the best sound he had heard in years. He was still crouching beside her on the grass, one hand on her back, counting her respirations the way he had counted 10,000 respirations before when Diane Hargrove arrived. "Get away from that car. You don't belong here. Somebody call security. Now." He looked up once. He looked back down at the child. The crowd had gathered by then. Residents who had heard the commotion, a groundskeeper who had stopped his cart at the edge of the lot, a woman in workout clothes who had her phone raised but was filming rather than calling. Nobody moved toward the child. Nobody moved toward Marcus. They stood in that particular stillness that descends on people when a situation has exceeded their understanding of their own role in it. Diane Hargrove did not exceed her understanding. She stepped forward. "I am the board chair of this community," she said, her voice dropping into the register she used for violations and warnings. The register that had ended vendor contracts and revoked parking privileges and made grown men apologize on their feet. "You are not authorized to be in this area. You broke that window. You're going to step away from that vehicle and that child right now, or I am going to have you removed." Marcus said nothing. He kept his hand on the baby's back. He kept counting. "Do you hear me?" Diane said. "I am talking to you." 7 words. That was all he had said since he arrived. He had said them to the baby, quietly, while he carried her away from the car. "You're okay. I've got you. You're okay." 7 words, and none of them had been for Diane Hargrove. The groundskeeper at the edge of the lot was a man named Darnell Price. He was 34 years old, had worked at Whitmore Estates for 3 years, and understood with the precision of long experience exactly what his position in this community permitted him to say and to whom. He had watched Marcus pull the child from the car. He had watched Diane Hargrove arrive and begin speaking. He had watched the crowd stand in its frozen semicircle and do nothing. Darnell Price understood the risk he was taking when he stepped off the grass and walked toward the group. He understood it clearly. He walked forward anyway. "Ms. Hargrove," he said, keeping his voice level, his hands visible. Every element of his posture in the range he had learned over 3 years would be read as non-threatening by the people in this community who could end his employment with a phone call. "He pulled the baby out of the car. I saw it. The car was on fire. He got her out." Diane Hargrove turned to look at him. The look was brief and absolute. "Darnell," she said, "this does not concern you. Please return to your work." He did not return to his work. He stayed where he was. He said nothing further, but he stayed, and his staying was its own kind of testimony. The sirens arrived at 7:22. 2 fire units and a paramedic rig rolling through the exterior gate. The first firefighter out of the rig was a lieutenant named Carla Osei, 8 years on the job, and she moved with the economy of someone who has learned to read a scene in the first 3 seconds. She read this one fast. She saw the burning car. She saw the baby on the grass. She saw the man in the brown uniform crouching beside the child with one hand on her back. And she saw the way he was positioned. Not the way a bystander crouches, not the way a frightened witness crouches, but the way someone crouches who has done this before and knows exactly what they're doing. She crossed to him in 6 strides. "What do we have?" she said. Marcus looked up. "Female infant, 8 to 12 months, approximate. Removed from vehicle approximately 8 minutes ago. Respirations regular, no visible burns, no loss of consciousness. She cried on extraction and has been intermittently calm since. No apparent trauma to the airway." He paused. "Car seat absorbed the impact of the window. I checked her neck and spine before I moved her. She was secured in a rear-facing seat." Carla Osei looked at him for 1 full second. "You a medic?" she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Used to be." She nodded once, the way one professional nods at another, and turned to her crew. "Get the board. Let's get her assessed." It was about to get much harder for Diane Hargrove to explain herself. She was still standing at the edge of the scene when Lieutenant Osei's partner began stringing the perimeter tape. The tape went up around the car, around the grass where the baby had been, around the area where Marcus had crouched, and in the process of going up, it enclosed Diane Hargrove in the outer ring of a scene she no longer controlled. She had not moved. She was watching the paramedics work over the child, watching the firefighters manage the car, watching the man in the brown uniform stand quietly at the edge of the response perimeter with his hands at his sides. And she was beginning, for the first time since she had crossed the parking lot, to feel something she did not often feel. She was beginning to feel that she might have misread the situation. She told herself it was a reasonable mistake. She told herself that anyone in her position would have done the same thing. She told herself that she had been acting in the interest of the community, that her job was to know who belonged and who did not, that the protocol existed for a reason. She was still telling herself these things when Lieutenant Osei walked back toward Marcus Webb and said, loudly enough that the remaining crowd could hear it clearly, "Sir, I need to get your information for the incident report. You're the one who pulled her out?" Marcus nodded. "Name?" she said, pen ready. He told her. And that was when the first thread began to pull loose, not with anger, not with any action Marcus Webb took. Simply because a lieutenant with 8 years on the job had asked a question out loud in front of witnesses, and the answer was going to be on record. Diane Hargrove heard the name. She watched Lieutenant Osei write it down. She watched the small, compressed nod that professionals exchange when they recognize something in each other, and she watched Marcus Webb stand quietly at the edge of all of it, not looking at her, not looking at the crowd, looking only at the paramedics working over the child on the grass. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself the situation had resolved itself, that the baby was breathing, that the fire was contained, and that the man in the brown uniform had perhaps done something useful, but had also been somewhere he was not supposed to be, and those two facts could coexist without one canceling the other. She was good at that kind of accounting. She had been doing it for years. What she could not account for was Darnell Price, who was still standing where he had stopped at the edge of the lot, watching. He had not returned to his cart. He had not spoken again after she dismissed him. He was simply present, in the way that a witness is present, steady, recording, refusing to look away. His hands were visible. His posture was still. He was watching Diane Hargrove the way she had never been watched in 5 years of chairing this board, not with hostility, not with challenge, but with an attention she felt on the back of her neck like a change in the weather. She turned away from him. The paramedic team had the baby on a small transport board now, moving efficiently, talking to each other in the clipped shorthand of people who have compressed language to its essential syllables. The baby was crying again. That sound, thin and insistent and alive, moved through the crowd like a current, and Marcus Webb, standing at the perimeter tape, closed his eyes for one moment when he heard it. Just one moment. Then he opened them and went back to watching. Diane Hargrove had made a decision. She was going to speak to the lieutenant. She was going to clarify the protocol, the access restrictions, the fact that this man had broken a car window on community property without authorization. And she was going to do it before the scene was cleared and the record was written without her version in it. She crossed the lot toward Lieutenant Osei. "Excuse me," she said, the board chair voice. "I'm Diane Hargrove. I'm the board chair of Whitmore Estates. I need to speak with you about what happened here." Carla Osei looked up from her clipboard. She was a compact woman with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that comes from years of managing chaos, and she looked at Diane Hargrove with an expression that was entirely neutral and entirely attentive, which was somehow more unsettling than anything else she could have done. "Ma'am," she said, "I'll need to finish the incident documentation first. If you have information relevant to the scene, I can take it now. Otherwise, I'll have someone from the department follow up." "I have information relevant to the scene," Diane said. "That man, the delivery driver, he was in a restricted area. He does not have authorization to be beyond the exterior staging gate. He broke the window of a resident's vehicle. I want that on record." Lieutenant Osei wrote something on her clipboard without looking up. "I'll note that," she said. "Can you tell me when you first observed the fire?" Diane paused. I observed the smoke when I came out of the clubhouse." "And at that point, had the child already been removed from the vehicle?" Another pause, shorter, but there. "I believe so," Diane said. "Yes." "So, when you arrived at the scene, the child was already on the grass?" "Yes." "And the individual you're describing is unauthorized? He was the one with the child at that point." It was not a question. It was a recitation of the facts in the order they had occurred, and Diane Hargrove heard them in that order for the first time, and something in her accounting shifted in a way she did not like. "That's correct," she said carefully. Lieutenant Osei looked up then, same neutral, attentive expression. "Thank you, Ms. Hargrove," she said. "We'll be in touch." She walked away, back toward Marcus Webb, and Diane Hargrove stood alone in the middle of the lot with the sound of the baby crying and the hiss of fire suppression and the quiet, steady presence of Darnell Price at the edge of her peripheral vision. And she understood, in the way that people understand things they are not yet ready to admit, that the morning was not going to resolve the way she had intended. She was right about that. She was more right than she knew. Now, here's what most people at Whitmore Estates did not know about what happened in the 48 hours that followed. The incident report filed by Lieutenant Carla Osei was thorough. It named Marcus Webb as the individual who had extracted the infant from the burning vehicle. It noted the time of extraction, the condition of the child on removal, the assessment Marcus had provided upon the lieutenant's arrival, and the fact that his assessment had been accurate in every particular subsequently confirmed by the paramedic team. It noted the window breakage as a necessary action taken to access a trapped occupant. It noted the presence of the board chair of Whitmore Estates and her statements at the scene. It was a factual document. It contained no editorializing. It did not need to. The baby's name, the department would later learn, was Amara. Her mother, a resident named Priya Nair, who lived in Townhouse 11, had run inside for 60 seconds to retrieve a forgotten bag and had come back out to find the car on fire and a stranger already running toward it. Priya Nair had been standing at the edge of the parking lot, too frozen with terror to move, when Marcus pulled her daughter free. She had not known his name until the fire lieutenant told her. She called the delivery company that afternoon and asked to speak to whoever handled driver commendations. The woman who took her call was named Sandra Reeves, a customer service supervisor who had worked for the company for 11 years. Sandra Reeves listened carefully, asked a few clarifying questions, thanked Priya Nair, and then pulled up Marcus Webb's employee file. She read it the way she read all employee files, quickly, looking for the relevant fields. Route assignment, tenure, performance record, and then, because Priya Nair had said the words, "He knew exactly what he was doing, he talked to the paramedics like one of them." Sandra Reeves scrolled down to the certification section. She stopped. She read it again. She sat back in her chair. The certification section of Marcus Webb's employee file listed in plain text in the fields the company's HR system had provided for exactly this kind of information. Emergency medical technician, State of Maryland current, Baltimore City Fire Department, 12 years of service. Paramedic certification, lapsed 2019 following medical separation. The medical separation itself was listed as a back injury sustained in the line of duty. He had filled out the forms honestly. Every word of it was there. No one had read it. Sandra Reeves sat with that for a long moment. Then she forwarded the file to her regional director, Greg Paulson, with a single line of context. "You need to see this before the press does." Because the press was already moving. The woman in workout clothes who had filmed rather than called was a resident named Bethany Crane, and she had posted the video to her social media account that morning with a caption she had intended as a straightforward account of a dramatic event. The video showed the parking lot, the smoke, the crowd, and Diane Hargrove's voice, clear and caring, ordering a man in a brown uniform away from a burning car. It showed Darnell Price stepping forward. It showed the arrival of the fire department. It did not show the extraction itself, but it showed everything that came after. By Tuesday evening, the video had been viewed 40,000 times. By Wednesday morning, 400,000 and 3 local news stations had reached out to Bethany Crane for comment. 2 had identified Diane Hargrove by name. 1 had already called the HOA's listed phone number and left a message for the board chair. Diane Hargrove did not call them back. She was in her kitchen on Wednesday morning, reading her phone with the particular stillness of a person watching something they cannot stop, reading the comments section beneath a video of herself, in her linen blazer, pointing her finger at a man who had just saved a baby's life. The comments were not kind. They were not measured. They were the full, unfiltered verdict of several 100,000 people who had watched 30 seconds of footage and formed a conclusion, and the conclusion was unanimous, and it was about her. She put her phone face down on the counter, picked it up again, put it down again. Greg Paulson called Marcus Webb at 7:45 Wednesday morning. He had read the file, he had watched the video, he had spent Tuesday night on the phone with the company's communications team and legal department, and he had come out of those conversations with a clear understanding of what the company needed to do and say. He told Marcus the company was proud of him. He told Marcus there would be a commendation, a public statement, and that he wanted to discuss Marcus's future with the company, that if there was anything Marcus needed, the company wanted to provide it. Marcus listened to all of this. Then he said quietly, "I'd like to go back to my root." Greg Paulson was quiet for a moment. "Of course, but Marcus, we'd like to tell your story, with your permission." A long pause on the line. "Tell the truth," Marcus said. "That's all." 5 words. Precise. He meant all of them. The company's statement went out Wednesday afternoon. 2 paragraphs. The first described what Marcus Webb had done. The second described who Marcus Webb was. The 12 years with Baltimore City Fire, the 4,000 calls, the current EMT certification, the back injury that had taken him off active duty but had not taken the training out of him. It named him. It thanked him. And it included a line that Sandra Reeves had written and Greg Paulson had kept without changing a word. His certifications were on file with us from the day he was hired. We are grateful that his training was there when it was needed most. That line landed like a stone in the still water, because it meant the information had always been available. It meant that anyone who had looked, anyone who had asked, anyone who had thought to consider the person behind the uniform would have known. The invisibility Marcus Webb had maintained for 6 years had not been a secret he was hiding. It had been a fact that no one had bothered to find. The video had 4 million views by Thursday morning. Diane Hargrove's phone rang steadily. She did not answer it. The Whitmore Estates HOA board received a formal request for a special meeting from 7 residents, citing conduct unbecoming of a board officer and requesting a review of the board chair's actions on the morning of the incident. The request cited the relevant section of the community bylaws and required a response within 10 business days. There was one more thing that happened on Wednesday, and it happened quietly, without cameras, without a crowd, without any of the noise surrounding everything else. Darnell Price was called into the property manager's office at 2 in the afternoon. The property manager, Kevin Aldrich, told Darnell that his conduct on Tuesday morning had been outside the scope of his role, that he had inserted himself into a situation that did not concern him, and that going forward he was expected to maintain the boundaries of his position. Darnell Price listened to all of it. He kept his hands visible. He kept his posture still. He kept every element of his bearing in the range he had learned over 3 years would be read as composed by the people in this community who held power over him. Then he said, "I saw a man pull a baby out of a burning car. I said so. I'd do it again." Kevin Aldrich looked at him for a moment. "That's all," he said. "You can go." Darnell Price went back to his work. He did not know yet that Priya Nair had seen him from across the parking lot that morning, had watched him step forward when no one else would, had noted his name from his uniform. He did not know she had made a second call on Wednesday afternoon, this one to Kevin Aldrich's supervisor at the property management company, detailed and specific, including the words, "I want to know what happened to the man who told the truth." He did not know any of that yet, but it was coming, and so was everything else. The reckoning did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way a tide arrives. Quietly, at first, in small increments that seem manageable, until the moment when the ground beneath you is simply gone. The Whitmore Estates HOA Board convened its special meeting on a Thursday evening, 10 days after the Tuesday that had changed everything. 7 residents had filed the formal request. 12 showed up. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, in the same room where Diane Hargrove had chaired 43 previous meetings with the ease of a woman who had never once lost the room. She sat at the head of the table in the same chair she always occupied. She had prepared remarks. She did not get to deliver them. The first resident to speak was a man named Gerald Fitch, who lived in the largest of the single-family homes on the eastern side of the community and who had, over 5 years, been one of Diane Hargrove's most reliable votes. He was 61 years old, retired, and he had watched the video 4 times. He said so. He said it plainly, without preamble, in the tone of a man who has made a decision and has stayed in it rather than argue in it. "I've been on this board with you for 4 years," Gerald Fitch said. "I've voted with you on everything. I'm not going to do that anymore, and I think you should step down." The room was quiet after that, not the quiet of shock, the quiet of people who had been thinking the same thing and were grateful someone had said it first. Diane Hargrove did not step down that evening. She said she needed time to consider her position. She said the situation had been mischaracterized. She said she had been acting in the interest of the community, which was her responsibility, which was why they had elected her. And here her voice carried a faint tremor she did not intend. No one argued with her, no one needed to. The vote to recommend her removal was taken at the end of the meeting, and it passed 6-1, the one dissenting vote being her own. She resigned the following Monday. The statement she released was brief and used the word regret twice and the word misunderstanding once. It did not name Marcus Webb. It did not use the word apologize. The comments beneath the news article that covered her resignation noted all of these absences with the thoroughness of people who had been paying close attention. The property management company completed its own review of the events of that Tuesday morning, prompted by Priya Nair's call and by a regional news outlet that had obtained, through a public records request, the incident report filed by Lieutenant Carla Osei. The report named Darnell Price as a witness. It noted that he had provided accurate information to emergency personnel and noted the time at which he had come forward. Kevin Aldrich was placed on administrative leave pending the review's completion. The review took 3 weeks. At the end of it, Kevin Aldrich was not reinstated. Darnell Price was called into a meeting with the regional director of the property management company, a woman named Valerie Moss, who had driven 2 hours from the main office specifically for this conversation. She told Darnell that the conduct of his former supervisor had not reflected the company's values. She told him that his own conduct had. She offered him a promotion, not to a different property, but to a supervisory position at the company's regional training center, where new groundskeeping staff were oriented and where, Valerie Moss said, the company needed someone who understood what it meant to do the right thing when it was not convenient. Darnell Price sat with that for a moment. Hands visible on the table, Old habit. I'd like that, he said. He started the new position the following month, and Marcus Webb went back to his route. He had said he wanted to, and the company had honored it. He drove the same roads, made the same stops, carried the same scanner clipped to his belt. The commendation the company issued was framed and hung in the regional office break room, and his name appeared in a brief segment on a local news program that he did not watch, and for approximately 2 weeks, residents along his route looked at him differently. A second glance, a longer nod, once a woman who came out of her front door specifically to thank him, which made him uncomfortable in a way he did not know how to explain. He thanked her. He went back to his truck. He finished his route. The baby, Amara, went home from the hospital the day after the fire. She was healthy. She had a small mark on her left forearm from the heat, barely visible, that the doctors said would fade. Priya Nair sent a letter to the delivery company addressed to Marcus Webb specifically. It was handwritten, 3 pages, and it said things that took her a long time to find words for. Marcus read it once, carefully, then folded it and put it in the drawer of the small desk in his bedroom, next to his grandmother's ledger. He did not respond in writing. He was not a man who found it easy to receive that kind of language. But he kept the letter the way he kept everything that mattered, quietly, without announcement, in a place where it would not be lost. Now, here's the part that most people, even those who followed the story closely, did not fully understand. The story they followed was the story of the video, the resignation, the commendation, the local news segment. That was the story the world saw. What the world did not see was what happened on the Saturday morning 2 weeks after the fire, on Clement Street in Baltimore, 3 blocks from the harbor. Marcus Webb drove to his grandmother's house. He did this every few weeks, had done it for years, and nothing about this visit was different from any other except that he arrived a little earlier than usual and sat on the concrete stoop beside her 5 clay pots of collard greens for a long time before he went inside. The greens were doing well. Cora Webb tended them with the same attention she gave to everything she valued, and they showed it. She was 83 years old. She moved slowly now and had a cane she used when she thought no one was watching, and she pretended she did not need it when Marcus was there because she was Cora Webb, and that was simply how she was. She made coffee. She sat across from him at the kitchen table where she had sat across from him for 40 years. She did not ask him about the video. She had seen it. Her neighbor's granddaughter had shown her on a phone at this same table, and Cora Webb had watched it once without speaking and then handed the phone back and said, "That's my grandson," in a tone that contained an entire life's worth of quiet pride and required nothing further from anyone in the room. She did not ask him how he felt about what had happened. She knew her grandson. She knew he had already processed all of it in the way he processed everything, internally, thoroughly, in his own time, and that what he needed from her was not analysis. She poured the coffee. She set a glass of water beside it, the way she always had. "You did right," she said. He nodded. "You stayed low," she said. He looked at her. "I stayed low," he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly, the way she had done since he was 11 years old, sitting at this same table with second-hand shoes in a day that had been harder than it should have been. Then she took her hand back and picked up her coffee cup and looked out the window at the morning. And Marcus Webb sat across from her in the house that smelled of coffee and collard greens and the particular kind of love that does not need to announce itself. And he was, for the first time since that Tuesday, entirely still. He had built high. He had let them underestimate him. He had stayed composed when composure was the hardest thing available to him. He had not retaliated. He had not raised his voice. He had not performed his worth for the crowd or corrected the record in the moment or done anything other than keep his hand on a baby's back and count her respirations and wait for the people who were coming to do the work they were coming to do. And the truth had surfaced anyway. The way truth always does. Slow and inevitable and impossible to argue with. Not because he had forced it, not because he had planned it, because he had filled out a form honestly 6 years ago, and a woman named Sandra Reeves had read it, and a lieutenant named Carla Osei had asked a question out loud, and a man named Darnell Price had stayed where he was when every instinct of self-preservation told him to go back to his cart. The truth had surfaced because enough people had chosen, in their own small ways, to let it. That is the part of this story I want you to sit with. Not the video, not the resignation, not the 4 million views or the framed commendation or the news segment. Those things happened, and they mattered. And the accountability they produced was real and earned and necessary. But the engine, underneath all of it, the thing that made the accountability possible, was simpler and quieter and more demanding than any of it. It was a man who had spent 22 years building something invisible and had never once asked to be seen for it. It was a woman who had worked 11 years in a customer service role and taken the time to read a file. It was a groundskeeper who had stepped off the grass when stepping off the grass could have cost him everything. It was a fire lieutenant who had asked a question, written down the answer, and filed a report that contained only facts, and did not need to editorialize because the facts were enough. This happens every day, not always with a burning car, not always with a crowd and a video and a board meeting and a resignation, but the architecture of it, the underestimated person, the certain authority, the crowd that watches, the one who steps forward, the truth that was always available to anyone who bothered to look. That architecture is not rare. It is ordinary. It is the structure of 1,000 mornings and 1,000 parking lots and 1,000 communities that believe they know, at a glance, who belongs and who does not. The question is not whether Marcus Webb deserved to be seen. He did. The question is what it cost for the world to see him. The question is how many people like him are out there right now, on a route, in a uniform, carrying 12 years of skill and 4,000 calls and a grandmother's Maxim and a current certification that no one has thought to look for, waiting for a moment that will either reveal them or pass without remark, depending entirely on whether someone decides to pay attention. Cora Webb's collard greens were doing well. The morning was quiet. Marcus Webb drank his coffee at the kitchen table where he had learned everything that mattered, and outside, 3 blocks from the harbor, the city moved around him the way it always had, without knowing, without asking, without any idea of what it was passing by. He did not mind. He had learned that too. If there is someone in your life who carries something extraordinary that the world has never thought to ask about, drop a comment and tell me about them. I want to hear it. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and consider subscribing. Every week, this channel finds the people the world overlooked and tells their stories. There are more of them than you think.